1831, Southampton County, Virginia, a place where your life was worth less than the cotton you picked, where reading a single word would get you into trouble, where your children could be sold away from you without a second thought. However, one day in 1831, something happened that would forever change the way slavery was seen in America. One man decided to stand up, to fight back against the horrific injustices that had kept his people in chains for centuries. His name was Nat Turner, and he was about to lead the deadliest slave revolt in American history. But Nat wasn't just any enslaved person. He was the most dangerous kind a plantation owner could imagine. He could read, he could write, and he believed he could talk to God. What Nat saw in that darkened sky wasn't just an eclipse. He saw a black man's hand covering the sun, a divine sign that would spark the most significant uprising in American history. But to understand how one man's prophecy turned into America's worst nightmare, we need to go back to the beginning. To understand the mind of an enslaved man who dared to fight against the system of slavery and white oppression. To understand Nat Turner. Before we continue, if you're passionate about uncovering the hidden history they don't teach in school, make sure to subscribe to Black Stories Untold. We do our best to bring you the real history that needs to be taught. Southampton County in the 1800s was a powder keg waiting to explode. This was a place where the enslaved outnumbered European Americans, and rebellion was waiting in the shadows. October 2nd, 1800, an enslaved woman named Nancy gives birth to a boy on Benjamin Turner's plantation. She names him Nat. The baby's father? Unknown. But Nat Turner was born different. From his earliest days, people knew there was something special about this child. He could apparently recall events from before his birth. He showed an intelligence that terrified and fascinated the others around him. Then, Benjamin Turner made a decision that would seal Virginia's fate. He allowed this enslaved child to learn how to read in the hopes that he would be a good preacher and help maintain order among the enslaved. However, in 1800s, Virginia, teaching an enslaved to read meant giving them power. A literate enslaved person was a direct threat to the entire system of slavery. They could write letters and spread dangerous ideas about freedom. But Benjamin Turner didn't just let Nat read. He also let him study Christianity while developing his mind and learning to write. Nat's natural intellect paired with his education turned him into a brilliant young man. Other enslaved people would say he had a quickness of apprehension that set him apart. He could outthink, outspeak, and outmaneuver anyone who crossed his path. But there was something else, something darker that kept his owners awake at night. Nat was having visions. Other slaves would eventually call him the prophet. As Nat was passed from owner to owner, Benjamin Turner, Samuel Turner, Thomas More, and finally John Travis, his reputation grew, his power grew, and his visions grew stronger. The tyrant owners of Southampton had created their own worst nightmare, a man with the intelligence to plan a rebellion, the charisma to lead one, and the divine conviction to see it through. All he would need was a sign from God. In 1821, young Nat vanished from his plantation. For 30 days, the overseers searched for him, and then something strange happened. He came back. Not because he was caught or he was starving. It was because God had ordered him to return to the service of my earthly master. The owners breathed a sigh of relief. They thought their educated enslaved person finally learned his place. They were dead wrong. By 1825, Nat wasn't just reading the Bible. He was discovering his divine purpose. While other enslaved people were forced to work until their hands bled, Nat would disappear for days at a time, fasting, praying, searching for signs from God. His first vision came like a thunderbolt. He saw a great battle, opposing races locked in fierce conflict, angels and demons clashing in the Virginia sky. It was a prophecy of war. But the vision that would change everything came in 1828. Nat heard a voice, clear as day. telling him that the time was coming. The spirit that spoke to the ancient prophets was now speaking to a Virginia slave. Nat was waiting, watching, looking for one final sign from God. On February 12th, 1831, that sign appeared in the heavens. The eclipse, the black hand across the sun. 6 months later, on August 13th, something even stranger happened. The sun took on a bluish-green hue, another sign written in the heavens themselves. The message was clear to Nat, and the time for prayer was over. The time for blood had come. Nat knew the biggest problem with enslavement revolts. They always failed because too many people knew about them. The plans would leak. The whites would find out. He wasn't going to make the same mistake. He chose 4 men. 4 men he knew he could trust with his life. Henry, Hark, Nelson, and Sam. These were the men he had the greatest confidence in, hardened by years of bondage, and most importantly, ready to die for their freedom. But these 4 men weren't disciples. They were soldiers following a general. The plan was simple but brilliant. Don't stockpile weapons. Don't gather supplies. Don't do anything that could tip off the slave owners. Instead, in Nat's own words, "We would slay my enemies with their own weapons." They waited, planned, prepared, and on the night of August 21st, 1831, everything came to a head. It started at the Travis plantation. 7 men gathered at Travis's cider press. Then they moved in absolute silence through the darkness. Joseph Travis, the man who thought he owned Nat, never saw them coming. The rebels caught the family in their sleep. No chance to raise an alarm. No chance to escape. The first blood of the revolution was spilled in the dead of night. Then, something happened that would set the pattern for the entire revolt. An enslaved man named Austin, who lived on the same small farm as Nat, saw what was happening. He hadn't been part of the original plan or scheming, but when he saw his chance at freedom, he took it. The army of 7 became 8. By sunrise, they abandoned stealth for open warfare. At Elizabeth Turner's plantation, Austin raised a gun and fired the rebellion's first shot. That gunshot signaled the start of full-scale revolt. Nat split his forces, one group on horseback, one on foot, a military tactic that made them twice as deadly and twice as fast. At Catherine Whitehead's plantation, 27 enslaved people watched as Nat's army surrounded the house. The rebels expected them all to join, to finally seize their chance at freedom, but only one did. In actuality, many slaves feared what would happen if they joined the rebellion. It was their only chance at freedom, true, but also a scary thought for a people who had only known servitude. What happened next would be seared into Virginia's memory forever. For the first and only time in the revolt, Nat, the prophet, the general, the man who had planned it all, took a life with his own hands. Margaret Whitehead fell before him, her passing marking the point of no return. The rebels left no survivors at the Whitehead plantation. Word spread, and panic gripped Southampton County. But the worst was yet to come. At Levi Waller's farm, they found a schoolhouse. Waller had heard the rebels were coming. In desperation, he gathered all the children together in one place, thinking he could protect them. That decision would haunt Southampton County forever. When Nat's army arrived, what followed was the single deadliest moment of the uprising. Waller himself escaped into the woods, leaving behind his wife and 10 children to face the revolution he had helped create. None survived. As they moved from plantation to plantation, something extraordinary happened. Their army grew. 7 became 20. 20 became 40. By sunrise, over 70 men had joined the uprising. The plantation owners' property had turned against them. The rebels moved like a storm across Southampton County. Then, they headed straight for the town of Jerusalem. Their target was the armory. With those weapons, they could arm hundreds more people who believe in their cause. But something else happened during this march. something that revealed what this revolt was really about. Nat and his army spared the poor whites, the ones who thought no better of themselves than they did the Negroes. This wasn't blind vengeance. This was about destroying a system that was built on the lie that some men were born to own and others were born to be owned. In less than 24 hours, 55 European Americans were dead, men, women, children. But on the horizon, an army of militiamen was gathering, and they were looking for revenge. While Nat's army was moving towards Jerusalem, they made a crucial stop at James Parker's farm. The main force went to the enslaved quarters to recruit more fighters, and Nat left a small group of rebels by the gate as lookouts. But that's when Alexander P. Pete's militia caught up with them. The militia struck fast, overwhelming the rebels at the gate. They thought they'd caught Nat's army off guard, split and vulnerable. But they were wrong. Like a storm breaking, Nat's main force exploded from the enslavers' quarters. The rebels crashed into Pete's men with such fury that the militia broke ranks and ran. The hunters had become the hunted. High on the taste of victory, Nat's men pursued their fleeing enemies into the darkness. And then they ran straight into a trap. Other militiamen, drawn by the sound of gunfire, had been waiting. In the chaos that followed, Nat's army shattered. The ambush scattered Nat's forces into the Virginia wilderness. Through the day and into the night, he gathered his surviving men at Thomas Ridley's plantation. By nightfall, 40 of his soldiers had made it back. But something had changed. The crushing defeat at Parker's farm had left them stripped of their confidence. In the dark hours before dawn, their own sentries returning with reports of militia movements sparked panic. The rebels mistook their own men for the enemy. In their panic, they fled to Samuel Blunt's plantation, thinking it was abandoned. But it wasn't. Blunt and 5 others were waiting. The rebels broke, and this time, there would be no coming back together. For the first time since the revolt began, Nat lost control of his army completely. What came next wasn't war. It was a hunt. 3,000 men soldiers, militia, and vigilantes poured into Southampton County. They weren't looking for rebels anymore. They were looking for revenge. A witness named Nelson Allen wrote home about what he saw. Every man is armed with a gun by his bed nights and in the field at work. A great many of the blacks have been shot, their heads taken off, stuck on poles at the forks of roads. Over 100 black people lost their lives, most of them innocent. The whites tortured suspects, burning their feet until they confessed. One man nearly had his foot burnt off before they realized he wasn't even part of the revolt. The conflict was so extreme that even a European American newspaper editor had to admit it was hardly inferior in barbarity to the atrocities of the insurgents. It got so bad that on August 28th, General Richard Epps had to step in. His order was clear. Any person who harmed an enslaved person for any cause whatever would face military punishment. The random retaliations eventually slowed, but soon came the trials for all those who had dared fight for their freedom. August 31st, 1831. Southampton County Courthouse fell silent as the trials began. The judges knew the world was watching. They crafted a careful performance of justice, appointing defense attorneys, demanding proper charges, even dismissing cases that lacked evidence. But beneath this veneer of fairness lay an inevitable conclusion. These slaves who had dared to challenge white superiority were doomed. 30 enslaved people faced grave sentences. For 12 of them, mercy came in an unexpected form. The court noted their youth, their reluctance, their minimal involvement. Governor Floyd agreed to spare them. For the other 19, the gallows cast long shadows. As summer faded into autumn, the executions transformed Southampton County's landscape. The grim warnings of the condemned appeared one by one along the county roads, grim markers of American vengeance. But with each passing week, one question burned in every mind. Where was Nat? While his followers met their fate at the gallows, Nat had vanished into the wilderness. Near the birthplace of his rebellion, he carved out a hidden sanctuary. A hole in the earth, concealed by pine needles and fence rails. For 6 weeks, he lived on the edge of survival, sustaining himself with rotted food and rainwater, clinging to the last threads of freedom. Then came the dog. On October 30th, the animal caught the scent of meat from Nat's hideout. It returned, leading 2 black hunters to the prophet's sanctuary. When Nat emerged from his hole, he begged them to keep his secret. Their retreating footsteps told him all he needed to know. He fled, but the Virginia wilderness had no more shelter to offer. The next day, a farmer named Benjamin Phipps found the most wanted man in the South. The iron bars of Jerusalem jail couldn't contain Nat's voice. He spoke freely about his revolution, his visions, his divine purpose. A local lawyer named Thomas R. Gray recognized something valuable in those words. For 3 days, he transcribed every detail of Nat's story, racing to copyright the confessions of Nat Turner before his subject could meet the hangman. November 11th, 1831, Nat's last sunrise. He walked to the gallows with his head held high, but even death wouldn't satisfy Virginia's appetite for vengeance. They defiled his body, dissected it, and carved pieces of his skin into trophies of their victory. But while Nat's body lay in pieces, his spirit was tearing Virginia apart. The state legislature moved swiftly, driven by fear. They banned all education for black people, whether enslaved or free. They restricted gatherings. They required ministers to oversee every black church service. Knowledge, they had learned, was a weapon more dangerous than any sword. Then came a moment that would have been unthinkable before Southampton County. In Richmond, Thomas Jefferson's grandson rose before the Virginia legislature. He proposed what many had secretly considered but none had dared to speak: gradual emancipation, the complete end of enslavement in Virginia. But of course, the vote failed. Virginia wouldn't consider freeing its enslaved people again until the Civil War forced its hand. But something fundamental had shifted thanks to Nat Turner. The South's response to Nat's rebellion revealed the truth about their system. It could only be maintained through absolute control and terror. Meanwhile, in the North, a different story was taking shape. William Lloyd Garrison's newspaper, The Liberator, painted Nat's rebellion in a different light. Here was proof of what abolitionists had long claimed. Beneath the South's gentle facade of happy enslaved people and benevolent masters lay a powder keg of resistance. For the next 30 years, Southampton County haunted America's dreams. The South learned one lesson: control through fear. The North learned another: enslavement itself was the true struggle. Today, a bronze marker stands in Southampton County. People still debate Nat Turner's legacy: murderer or freedom fighter, terrorist or revolutionary. But beyond these labels lies a simpler truth. In August 1831, an enslaved preacher shattered the myth of the contented slave. He forced America to see its great sin in all its harsh reality. The South's desperate attempt to prevent another Southampton County only hastened their nightmare's arrival. With each new law, each new restriction, each new act of terror, they pushed the nation closer to civil war. Nat Turner's rebellion sent shockwaves through America, proving that the fight for black liberation would never be silenced. But his uprising was just the beginning. Over a century later, another man would rise. This time, not with a sword, but with a shotgun and a political vision. Huey P. Newton and the Black Panther Party took the fight for freedom to the streets, challenging the very foundation of American power. His story is one they don't want you to hear. Click here to watch how Huey Newton became the revolutionary America feared the most.